All right. This is Jerry Diamond with How to Get Out of Babylon. I don't know if it's going to show up different, but boy, I'll tell you, the screen on this tablet shows a really white, very lighted picture. The other light's not on, but that should make it worse. Anyway, okay, I'm going to read at least one of these. There's 2 epilogues, so I'll read one. Maybe leave the other one until tomorrow because it is just about midnight. I'd like to lay it down really quick here. So here we go. The gnarled ironwood cane had a silver head in the shape of a rooster. The gray-haired, deeply tanned man used it to push himself to standing as the young man with the NASA Public Relations badge approached him. "Good morning," he said brightly. "Are you Mr. Horn?" "I am he, John Horn," John answered. "This is my wife, Anne, my sister, Carla Johnson, my niece, Brittany Daniels, and her husband, Stephen." "Ah, very good. You're right on time," the young man said as he made 5 check marks in the page on his clipboard. "If you'll be so kind as to follow me, the shuttle bus is right this way. These are your observer's badges. Please be sure to wear them visibly at all times while you're in the launch observation area." John accepted the preferred badges and distributed to their respective recipients. They followed the PR man towards the outside door a trifle more slowly than their guide seemingly would have preferred, but John's prosthetic knee was twinging him this morning. He looked at Anne as they walked and said, "When we get home, I'm going to ask Roberto to examine my knee again. That hospital fella can say what he wants, but every time they fool with the damn thing, hurts me." His wife nodded, then cut her eyes at Brittany, but said nothing. Her husband had complained about that knee ever since they'd replaced it 10 years before. She didn't know what Roberto could do for the prosthesis that the hospital couldn't, but if having Roberto look at it made him feel better, she was quite willing for him to do it, since even if there was no discernible difference between what he did and what the medical techs did. After years of asking Brittany to inquire privately at the medical center about what the problem could be, she half suspected John insisted on it just to be able to see Miguel, who seldom left his home anymore after his wife had died 8 years ago, and himself suffering from a debilitating spinal deterioration. Outside, again, John slowed still more as they moved toward the bus to look widely about himself. It had been 26 years since he'd last been to Cape Canaveral. Before the impact, in fact, and it was as if he'd never seen the place before. That visit had been the second time he and Anne had taken Melinda to show their daughter the glories of what mankind could achieve when he, or she, they hoped, stretched forth his mind and will to do so. Fool everybody. The old vehicle assembly building and launch gantries dating back to the days of the Apollo program had, of course, disappeared in the impact-induced tsunami, so in a manner of speaking, it was really his first trip. The day had not yet succumbed to August's heat, so he could see in the distance the containment domes and white plumes rising from the cooling towers of the 3 nuclear power plants that powered the NASA launching lasers, the rest of the Space Center, and a fair part of the northern and central areas of Brevard County, which played host to NASA's Florida outpost. There was a liftoff every 12 hours from one of the 6 launching bays dotted several miles apart the length of Cape Canaveral. They fed and sustained the burgeoning orbital industries that had risen in the last 15 years. Post-impact, the Space Center had greatly expanded its physical area on the Cape after the asteroid-spawned tsunamis had washed away all human habitation from the low stretch of sand and coquina lying between the Indian River and Atlantic Ocean. Finally, the party reached their conveyance, the last to do so, it seemed, as the bus pulled away from the building as soon as they'd taken their seats. 5 minutes later, they arrived at the observation building and went inside to take their places. When the PR man showed them to their chairs, John looked at their seatmates and said, "Hello, Luke. How are things in Seattle these days?" The distinguished gray-haired man looked up with an expression of surprise and said, "John Horn, and Anne, Brittany, Stevie, and you must be Carla. Cindy looks just like you. Good to see you. Damn good to see you. Glad you came. John, Anne's told us you've gotten so hard to pry away from the farm she was afraid she was going to have to use dynamite." John grinned and said, "Well, I'm not too big on traveling anymore, to be sure. don't ever seem to sleep well in strange beds. But this is a once-in-a-lifetime event. But what brings you here anyways? I thought Heather had a comfortable berth on L5. Coming down just to see Mel off? Oh, I thought you knew, Luke said with an air of surprise. Kristen Hart had a skiing accident in Switzerland and badly injured her right leg. They scrubbed her from the mission, but it was so close to the launch date they didn't have time to start an entirely new search for another physician. Heather and Kristen are both female, about the same mass. Heather's space rated and has space experience, so they asked her if she'd volunteer, and she did. Richard was a bit beside himself about that, you can well imagine, but he gave in gracefully about his wife going. You know, he put in for a pilot slot but didn't make the cut, not strong enough in the secondary fields, it seems. Anne chuckled. Well, Mel is finally starting to pay us back for all those times she had my heart in my mouth about after talking her daddy into letting her take flying lessons when she was old enough. I promised John till death do us part, but that day he nearly found out what the cause of death was going to be. I reckon this means that Heather and Mel have already seen each other then, John said. Mel tells me that the entire crew is supposed to train together so they can try to spot any irreconcilable personality conflicts. As an afterthought, he added, funny though that Mel didn't mention seeing Heather in her last email. Been 5 years since they saw each other last, I think. Lisa joined the conversation for the first time. Actually, I'm not sure they have met yet. Heather tells me that they had to give her such an accelerated familiarization to get her ready on time that she's only met 2 of the other 6 crew members. She won't meet the other 4, which seems to include Mel, until they all come together on L5 before they transit to the Prometheus. The NASA human behavior people are a little bent about this, but the president said the launch was to be on time or else. Well, if she already met 2 of the others, then including Mel, and observe that leaves only 3 unknowns, because I certainly don't think they'll have any trouble with each other. John interjected. The way that 2007 asteroid had got the country worked up, I imagine the mission commander would just jettison anyone he thought was causing a problem. They've got backups for their backups. Carla laughed. You could be right. Besides, there's a lot of national prestige in flying off in a great white spaceship to literally save the world from death and destruction on a live video feed, no less, then maneuvering the rock into a parking orbit so we can mine it of its resources. I hear tell this is putting the Chinese and European space programs into a real swivet. The EU just fired their program director for lack of progress on their craft, and the Chinese reportedly have redoubled their espionage of our program to try to catch up. Stevie spoke up to add, Neil Stackham over to the University PD tells me that they just backed up the FBI, picking up a Chinese team posing as Taiwanese visiting scholars who are hacking the NASA system. Said the FBI told him they just picked up another team in California doing the same thing. John cackled. Good. If we've got them on anything, we've left the whole world sucking hind tit when it comes to the space development. You can bet them Chinese fellows are just green about our bringing that rock home and the way we magnanimously offered to sell them iron from our smelting operations once we get the assembly line going. You know, that's just got to be sticking in their craw for sure. All right. That's it. Good night. This is Jerry Diamond, How to Get Out of Babylon. If you're listening to this, you are the remnant, people. All right.